The auction block stood in the center of San Antonio, Texas, beneath a merciless July sun that turned the wooden platform into a stage of human misery. And Natalie Zimmerman wondered if this was how her story would end before it ever truly began. She had been 20 years old for exactly 3 weeks when the creditors came to collect on her late father's gambling debts. 3 weeks of being an adult in the eyes of the law. And now she stood in a dress that had once been cream-colored but was now dulled by travel dust, her dark hair pinned back severely, her green eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. If she looked at their faces, at the men appraising her like livestock, she thought she might break entirely. The year was 1876. And San Antonio was a bustling crossroads where cattle drives met civilization, where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card, where the law was still finding its footing and people could slip through the cracks. Natalie had slipped through one of those cracks when her father died 3 months ago, leaving nothing but debts and a daughter with no other family to claim her. The bank had been patient for exactly 6 weeks before they sold his debts to a man named Carson who specialized in collecting what was owed through whatever means necessary. "Gentlemen," Carson's voice boomed across the plaza, "this here is Miss Zimmerman. Educated, healthy, young. Can read, write, and cipher. Worth every penny of the debt owed, which stands at $800. Natalie's jaw clenched. $800 her father had lost over cards and whiskey, and now she was supposed to work off that debt to whoever paid it. The legal language said indentured servant, but everyone knew what that meant for a young woman with no protection. 7 years of service, the contract read. 7 years, that might as well be a lifetime. The bidding started at $200. A saloon keeper she recognized from the rougher side of town offered $300. A mine owner from up north countered with $400. Natalie felt her stomach turn with each new voice, each new claim on her future. Then a voice cut through the others, quiet but carrying weight. $1,000. The crowd went silent. Natalie's eyes found the speaker for the first time. He stood at the back of the gathering, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. But she could see his jaw, strong and set, and something in his posture that spoke of a man who did not make empty gestures. 1,000, the auctioneer repeated, clearly stunned. Do I hear 1,100? The saloon keeper shook his head and stepped back. The mine owner stared at the stranger, then spat in the dust and walked away. No one else spoke. Sold to the gentleman for $1,000. Step up and settle your account, sir. The stranger moved through the crowd, and as he climbed the platform steps, Natalie finally saw his face clearly. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair that needed cutting, blue eyes that held something between kindness and sadness, and a face weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome. He did not look at her as he counted out the money into Carson's greedy hands, did not even glance her way as the paperwork was signed and witnessed. She is yours, Mr. Taylor. 7 years of legal service as per the contract. The man called Taylor finally turned to face her. Up close, his eyes were the color of the sky before a storm, and they met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. But there was no cruelty in them, no possession, just something she could not quite name. Come with me, he said quietly, and stepped down from the platform. Natalie hesitated only a moment before following. What choice did she have? At least he did not look like the kind of man who would hurt her, though she had been wrong about men before. Her father had seemed kind too, right up until his weakness for gambling had destroyed everything. He led her to a sturdy horse tied outside the general store, then paused and turned to face her fully. The street was still crowded with people going about their business, but he seemed not to care who heard what he said next. "Miss Zimmerman, my name is James Taylor. I own a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the contract Carson had just given him. "This says you owe 7 years of service to pay off your father's debt. I know what it says." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. He held her gaze for a long moment, then did something she never expected. He tore the contract in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall to the dusty street. "What are you doing?" The words burst from her in shock. "That debt was not yours to pay. Your father made his choices and he is gone. You should not be bound by them." James Taylor's voice was steady, certain. "I paid it because I could not stand by and watch that circus, but the debt is settled now. You owe me nothing." Natalie stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "I do not understand. I am saying you are free. Free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. I will give you money for a stage ticket if you want to leave Texas entirely, or help you find honest work here in town if you prefer." He paused, and something flickered in those blue eyes. "Or you can come to my ranch, not as a servant but as a guest, until you decide what you want to do with your life. You can stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why would you do this?" James looked away for the first time, his jaw working as if he was deciding how much to say. "Because 5 years ago, my sister was in a similar situation. Different circumstances, but the same kind of trap. No one helped her. She made choices out of desperation that cost her everything." His voice roughened. "She died 3 years ago, and I have had to live with knowing I was not there when she needed me. I was building my ranch, focused on my own ambitions. I cannot change what happened to her, but I can make sure another young woman does not have to face that same desperation." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Natalie's chest. She had expected many things from this day, but not this. Not freedom offered with no strings attached, not kindness from a stranger, not a choice when she thought all her choices had been taken away. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. The words hurt to say, acknowledging how completely alone she was in the world. "My father was all the family I had, and after the debts were paid, the creditors took everything we owned. I have the clothes I am wearing and nothing else." James nodded slowly. "Then come to the ranch. Stay as long as you need. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who has been after me to hire help. She is getting older and the house is big. You can help her if you want to feel useful, but it is not a requirement. It is just a place to stay while you figure out your next step." Natalie studied his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives, for anything that would explain why a rancher would throw away $1,000 and expect nothing in return. But all she saw was sincerity and a bone-deep weariness that spoke of old grief. "All right," she said finally. "I will come to your ranch, but I will work for my keep. I will not be a charity case." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "Fair enough. Can you ride?" "I grew up in town. I have ridden, but not well." "Then you will ride with me. It is safer than trying to teach you on the way." He swung up onto his horse with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. "It is not far." Natalie took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work, and let him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under the added weight, but did not protest. She had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her seat, and she felt him tense slightly at the contact before relaxing. "Hold tight," was all he said, and then they were moving. They rode out of San Antonio at an easy pace, the afternoon sun beating down on them. Natalie had never been this close to a man before, had never felt the solid warmth of a male body against hers, and it made her acutely aware of every breath, every shift of movement. But James Taylor did not take advantage. He simply rode, steady and sure, occasionally pointing out landmarks as they traveled. "That is the Martinez spread," he said, gesturing to a collection of buildings in the distance. "Good neighbors. Their daughter Maria is about your age, and beyond that rise is my land. 3,000 acres of decent grazing land and a creek that runs year-round. How long have you had the ranch?" 7 years. Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives up to Kansas. It was not much when I started, just a run-down house and overgrazed land. But I have built it into something solid." There was quiet pride in his voice. 50 head of cattle now, good breeding stock, a few horses, enough to make a living. That is impressive. And it was. Building something from nothing took determination and backbreaking work. "It is home," he said simply. They rode in silence for a while, and Natalie found herself relaxing despite everything. The nightmare of the auction was fading behind them, and ahead was uncertainty, but at least it was uncertainty she had some choice in. James Taylor had given her that, and she did not know how to begin thanking him. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, and Natalie felt her breath catch. It was not grand, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. A sturdy wooden house with a wide porch, a barn that looked newly repaired, corrals with horses grazing peacefully. Gardens near the house showed green and growing. Mountains rose in the blue distance, and the whole scene was painted gold by the late afternoon sun. "Welcome to the Taylor Ranch," James said, and she heard the affection in his voice for this place he had built. As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a bun, and she wore a simple dress protected by an apron. Her face was lined but kind, and her eyes sharp with intelligence. "James Taylor, you were supposed to be back 2 hours ago," she called out. "I have been worrying myself sick. Sorry, Mrs. Chen, I got held up in town." James dismounted and then helped Natalie down, his hands careful and respectful at her waist. "I have brought a guest. This is Miss Natalie Zimmerman. She will be staying with us for a while. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes took in Natalie's appearance, the dust on her dress, the tension still visible in her shoulders, and something knowing passed over her face. "I see. Well, Miss Zimmerman, welcome. Any friend of James is welcome here." She turned her gaze to James. "I assume she will need the guest room prepared." "Yes, please. And Natalie, Mrs. Chen runs this house with an iron fist. You listen to her and you will do fine." There was warmth in his voice, clear affection for the older woman. "Come along then, child, Mrs. Chen said, already heading back inside. "You look like you could use a good meal and a bath. James, you see to your horse and then wash up. Dinner in an hour." Natalie followed Mrs. Chen inside and found herself in a home that was simple but comfortable. The furniture was sturdy and well made, the floors clean, windows letting in good light. It smelled like baking bread and something savory that made her stomach clench with hunger. She had been too nervous to eat that morning. "The guest room is upstairs, Mrs. Chen said, leading her up a narrow staircase. "It is not fancy, but the bed is good and the linens are clean. I will bring up water for washing." She paused at the top of the stairs, turning to face Natalie directly. "James is a good man, one of the best I have known. Whatever happened in town today, whatever brought you here, you are safe in this house. You understand?" Tears suddenly stung Natalie's eyes, the kindness almost harder to bear than the cruelty would have been. "Yes, madam, thank you." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "You have had a hard day, I think. Rest, wash, and then we will eat. Things always look better on a full stomach." The guest room was small but lovely, with a window overlooking the corrals and distant hills. The bed was covered in a quilt that showed skilled handiwork, and there was a washstand with a porcelain basin. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of everything that had happened. This morning she had woken in a bare room at the boarding house where Carson kept her, knowing that today she would be sold, knowing her life as she knew it was over. She had prepared herself for horror, for degradation, for losing every shred of dignity she possessed. Instead, a stranger had bought her freedom and asked for nothing in return. Mrs. Chen returned with a pitcher of warm water and fresh towels. "There are some dresses in the wardrobe that might fit you. They belonged to James's sister before she left. He could never bring himself to get rid of them." Her voice was gentle. "I think Sarah would be happy to know they were being put to use." Sarah, that was his sister's name. Yes, sweet girl, but troubled. Life was not kind to her. Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. James took her death hard. Blamed himself, though there was nothing he could have done by the time he learned she was in trouble. He said he was not there when she needed him. He was here, building this ranch, trying to make something of himself so he could bring her to live with him. She was supposed to join him once he got established, but things went wrong before that could happen. Mrs. Chen moved to the wardrobe, pulling out a simple blue dress. "This should fit. You are about her size. Now I will leave you to freshen up. Come down when you are ready, after Mrs. Chen left. Natalie stripped off her dusty dress and washed with the warm water, feeling layers of grime and fear wash away. The blue dress fit reasonably well, perhaps a little loose in the waist, but it was clean and whole. She brushed out her hair and pinned it back up, then stared at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked different somehow. Still herself, but changed. The fear in her eyes had diminished, replaced by something else. Possibility, maybe, or hope. Downstairs, she found the kitchen, where Mrs. Chen was putting the finishing touches on dinner. James had cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He looked up when Natalie entered, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw her in his sister's dress. "It fits," was all he said, but his voice was rough. "Mrs. Chen was kind enough to lend it to me. I hope that is all right, of course. Sarah would be glad to know someone was getting use from it." He cleared his throat. "Dinner smells wonderful, Mrs. Chen. Sit down, both of you. James, pour the young lady some water. She looks half parched." They sat at the sturdy kitchen table, and Mrs. Chen served beef stew with fresh bread, green beans from the garden, and apple pie for dessert. It was the best meal Natalie had eaten in months, since before her father died, and she had to force herself not to eat too quickly. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Zimmerman," James said as they ate. "Your father raised you in San Antonio." "Yes. He was a clerk at the land office. It was not exciting work, but it was steady, and we had a good life. My mother died when I was young, so it was just the two of us." Natalie traced the rim of her water glass with one finger. "He started gambling about 2 years ago. I did not realize how bad it had gotten until after he died. The debts just kept coming and there was no money to pay them. And no other family, none. My mother's parents died before I was born and my father was an only child. There was no one to turn to." The words hurt less to say now, maybe because these people were listening with compassion rather than judgment. "What did you do before all this happened?" Mrs. Chen asked. "James mentioned you are educated." "My father insisted I go to school. I can read and write, do figures. I helped him with his paperwork sometimes. I thought maybe I would become a teacher, but I was still finishing my own education when he died." "Can you sew, cook, keep house?" Mrs. Chen's questions were practical, not unkind. "I can sew reasonably well. My cooking is adequate but not inspired. I kept house for my father, so I know the work." James had been listening quietly, but now he spoke. "You should know what you are getting into here. I run cattle, which means I am often out on the range for long hours. During roundup or when we are moving cattle, I might be gone for days. Mrs. Chen manages the house and does the cooking, but she also keeps the books and handles correspondence. Ranch work is hard, and there is always something needing doing. I am not afraid of hard work, Natalie said firmly. I did not think you were. James met her eyes across the table. But I want you to understand that if you stay here, even temporarily, people in town will talk. A young, unmarried woman living on a bachelor's ranch will raise eyebrows. Let them talk, Mrs. Chen said sharply. Anyone who knows James knows his character. And I am here as chaperone, for what that is worth. I am not concerned about gossip, Natalie said, though that was not entirely true, but what choice did she have? You have given me a chance when I had none. I will not waste it worrying about what small minds think. James nodded, something like approval in his expression. All right then. Tomorrow I will show you around the ranch, introduce you to the hands. We have 2 men who work here full-time, Manuel and his son Diego. Good men, trustworthy. But if you ever feel uncomfortable or unsafe, you tell me immediately. Understood. Understood. After dinner, Natalie helped Mrs. Chen clean up despite the older woman's protests. It felt good to do something useful, to contribute even in a small way. James excused himself to check on the horses one final time, leaving the 2 women alone in the kitchen. He is not usually this talkative, Mrs. Chen said as she dried the dishes Natalie washed. You are good for him. I have barely said anything. Exactly. You do not chatter or demand attention. You are comfortable with silence. James appreciates that. Mrs. Chen handed her another plate. He has been alone too long, that boy. Buried himself in this ranch and work trying to outrun his grief over Sarah. It is not healthy. How did she die? Natalie asked quietly, if it is not too painful to speak of. Mrs. Chen was silent for a long moment. She was working in a saloon in El Paso, not as a dancer or anything like that, just serving drinks. But some men do not see the difference. One night, a cowboy got too rough with her, and when she fought back, he killed her. Beat her to death in an alley behind the saloon. Her voice was flat, containing old anger. James did not learn about it until 2 weeks after she was buried. He went to El Paso, tracked down the man responsible and turned him over to the law. The man hanged for what he did, but it did not bring Sarah back. Natalie felt sick. That is horrible. It is the world we live in, child. Women alone, women without protection or money are vulnerable. James knows that better than most. That is why he did what he did today, I would wager. He could not save his sister, but he could save you. I am not sure I am worth $1,000. That is not for you to decide. James made his choice and he can afford it. This ranch does well enough. Mrs. Chen hung up her dish towel. Now, you have had a long day. Go get some rest. Tomorrow we'll come early around here. Natalie climbed the stairs to the guest room, her body suddenly exhausted. The bed was soft, the quilt smelling of lavender and fresh air, and she sank into it gratefully. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses moving in the corrals, the distant lowing of cattle, crickets singing in the darkness. And underneath it all, the low murmur of James's voice as he spoke to his horses, words she could not make out but the tone gentle, affectionate. She fell asleep thinking about blue eyes and torn contracts, about freedom offered without strings, about a man who had looked at her not as property but as a person worth saving. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Natalie dressed in another of Sarah's dresses, this one a practical brown that would not show dirt, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Chen was already in the kitchen, and James was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, looking over some papers. "Good morning," Natalie said, suddenly shy. James looked up and smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "Morning, did you sleep well? Better than I have in months." "Coffee," Mrs. Chen offered, "please." They ate breakfast together, eggs and bacon and fresh bread, while James outlined the day ahead. "I need to ride out and check the south pasture, make sure the fence line is holding. Manuel and Diego are working on the barn roof. I thought maybe you would like to come with me, see more of the ranch." "I would like that," Natalie said, meaning it. "Can you ride any better this morning than you could yesterday?" "Probably not." "Then you will ride with me again. I will teach you proper riding later when we have more time." An hour later they were riding across the ranch land, the morning sun bright and warm. Natalie sat behind James again, her arms around his waist, and tried to focus on the landscape rather than the lean strength of the man in front of her. This was kindness, she reminded herself. Charity, even if he did not call it that. She should not read anything more into it, but it was hard not to notice things. The way he sat a horse like he was born to it. The competent way he handled everything, from opening gates without dismounting to pointing out landmarks. The gentle way he spoke about the land, about the cattle, about the work of building something lasting. "That is where I want to build a bigger house someday," he said, pointing to a spot on a rise overlooking a bend in the creek. "The current house is fine, but I have plans for something larger. More rooms, a bigger porch, a place for a family. You want a family someday, when I find the right woman." He glanced back at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "What about you? What do you want, Natalie?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his low voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "I do not know any more. Before my father died, I thought I knew. I would become a teacher, maybe marry someday if I found someone kind. Have a simple, quiet life, but now everything has changed. Change does not mean ruined. It just means different." James turned his attention back to the trail ahead. "You are young, educated, capable. You can still become a teacher if you want, or anything else you set your mind to. With what money, what references, I have nothing. You have time. Stay here, help Mrs. Chen learn about ranching if you are interested. When you are ready to move on, I will give you references and enough money to get started somewhere new. No strings, no debt. Just help between friends." "We are not friends," Natalie said, but there was no heat in it. "We have known each other less than a day. Then we will become friends. I could use one. Mrs. Chen is wonderful, but she treats me like a son, not a friend. Manuel and Diego are employees. I do not have many people I can just talk to." "Why not? Surely there are other ranchers around, people in town." James was quiet for a moment. "I am not good at letting people in. After Sarah died, it seemed easier to just focus on work, on building the ranch. People wanted to offer sympathy, and I did not want sympathy. I wanted to go back and change things, save her, make different choices. Since I could not do that, I just kept my head down and worked." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission was quiet, honest. "But I did not know what else to do." They rode in silence for a while, checking fence posts, counting cattle, doing the everyday work of ranch management. Natalie found it peaceful, being out in the open spaces, watching James work. He was patient, thorough, clearly knowledgeable about every aspect of his operation. When they stopped to water the horse at the creek, James helped her down and they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. The water rushed over stones, clear and cold, and birds sang in the branches above. "Thank you for yesterday," Natalie said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I know I said it before, but I need you to understand what you did for me. I was so frightened. I thought my life was over, that I would spend the next 7 years being used and broken by whoever bought that contract. And then you tore it up and gave me choices again. I do not have the words to tell you what that means." James picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "My sister wrote me letters. I found them in her things after she died. She wrote about being scared, about feeling trapped, about not knowing how to get out of the situation she was in. She never mailed them, maybe because she did not want to burden me, or maybe because she thought I would not care. But I would have cared. I would have dropped everything and gone to her if I had known." He threw the stone into the creek, watching the splash. "When I saw you on that auction block yesterday, I saw Sarah. I saw what might have happened to her if things had gone just slightly differently, and I knew I could not walk away. You did a good thing. I did the only thing I could live with." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his blue eyes took her breath away. "You remind me of her, you know, not just the situation, but you, the way you hold your head up even when you are scared. The way you do not complain or make excuses. Sarah was like that too, strong even when life tried to break her. I do not feel strong. Strength is not about feeling. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified. You have that." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. I want to show you something." He pulled her to her feet, and they walked along the creek for a few minutes until they reached a spot where the water pooled, deep and clear. Wildflowers grew along the banks, and the trees formed a natural canopy overhead. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," James said. "When things get hard, when I need to think, I come here. It is peaceful. I wanted you to know about it in case you ever need a place to think too." The gesture touched her deeply. He was sharing something personal, something that mattered to him, and she understood it for what it was, an offering of trust. "It is beautiful," she said softly. They stood there for a while, not speaking, just listening to the water and the birds and the whisper of wind through the leaves. Natalie felt something shift inside her, some tight knot of fear and anger beginning to loosen. Maybe things really could be different. Maybe she really could find a way forward. Maybe this man standing beside her could help her find it. Over the next weeks, Natalie settled into life at the Taylor Ranch. She helped Mrs. Chen with the house, learning to bake bread that actually rose properly and make stews that did not burn. She practiced her riding on a gentle mare named Daisy, with James patiently teaching her until she could manage on her own. She learned about cattle and horses, about mending fences and reading weather signs, about the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. And she learned about James. She learned that he rose before dawn every day and always checked on the horses first thing. That he had a sweet tooth and loved Mrs. Chen's apple pie but would never take the last piece. That he read in the evenings when work was done, favoring adventure stories and agricultural journals in equal measure. That he sang to the cattle when he worked them, old trail songs in a surprisingly good voice. That he was kind to his employees, fair in his dealings and generous with neighbors who needed help. She learned that he was a good man, maybe the best she had ever known, and somewhere in those weeks, her gratitude began to shift into something deeper and more dangerous. One evening about a month after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Mrs. Chen had gone to bed early with a headache, leaving them alone. It was proper enough with the door open and the evening still light, but there was an intimacy to the moment that made Natalie's heart race. "You have been here a month now," James said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Are you settling in all right? If there is anything you need, anything that would make you more comfortable, you only have to ask. I am more than comfortable. I am happy." The words surprised her with their truth. "I have not been happy in a long time, and I did not expect to be again so soon. But this place, the work, the people, it is good. I am glad." James rocked slowly in his chair, his gaze on the sunset. "You have been good for the ranch, too. Mrs. Chen tells me the house has never run smoother, and I have noticed how well you have taken to the work. You are a natural. I like it. I never thought I would enjoy ranch work, but there is something satisfying about it. Things are concrete here. You mend a fence and it stays mended. You feed the animals and they thrive. It is straightforward in a way town life never was. I know what you mean. That is part of why I love it. He glanced over at her, and in the golden light of sunset, his eyes looked almost amber. Have you thought about what comes next? I meant what I said about you staying as long as you need, but I also do not want you to feel trapped here. If you want to pursue teaching or anything else, I will help you do that. Natalie had been thinking about exactly that question. A month ago, she had arrived here with nothing, expecting to stay only long enough to figure out her next move. But somewhere along the way, the ranch had stopped feeling temporary and started feeling like home. And James had stopped being just a kind benefactor and started being something else. I do not want to leave, she said carefully. Unless you want me to. No. The word came out fast, almost sharp. No, I do not want you to leave. I just do not want you to feel obligated to stay because I paid your father's debt. That is not a debt between us. I know. You made that clear from the beginning. Natalie took a breath, trying to find the right words. I stay because I want to be here, because this place feels right to me, because the people here. She trailed off, not quite brave enough to finish that sentence. James had stopped rocking. He was looking at her now with full attention, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. Because the people here what? Feel like family, she said, taking the safer path. Mrs. Chen treats me like a daughter. Manuel and Diego have been nothing but kind and respectful, and you. She met his eyes. You have been a friend like you said you would be. A better friend than I knew to hope for. Just a friend. His voice was low, intense, and it sent shivers down her spine. Natalie's mouth went dry. This was dangerous territory, but she could not seem to stop herself from stepping into it. What else could we be? James stood abruptly and walked to the porch railing, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, his hands gripping the rail. Natalie, I need to be honest with you about something. When I bought your contract, it really was just about giving you freedom. I did not have any ulterior motives, any plans beyond helping someone who needed help. But this past month, having you here, getting to know you, things have changed. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. Changed how? I look forward to seeing you at breakfast. I think about you when I am out working the cattle. I find excuses to be near you, to talk to you, to hear you laugh. He turned around, and the look in his eyes was raw, vulnerable. I am falling in love with you, Natalie. Maybe I have already fallen. And I needed you to know that, but I also need you to know that it does not change anything. You can still stay here with no expectations, no pressure. I will not make things uncomfortable for you. I just could not keep lying about what I feel. Natalie stood slowly, her legs trembling. She had hoped, in secret moments she barely admitted to herself, that he might feel something for her. But hearing him say it, seeing the emotion in his face, was overwhelming. James, she said softly, I think about you too, all the time. At first I thought it was just gratitude, but it is more than that. When you smile at me, my whole day is better. When you are gone for long hours, I miss you. When you are near me, I feel safe and happy, and like maybe the future could be something wonderful instead of something to fear. She took a step closer to him. I do not know if what I feel is love yet. I have never been in love before, but I think it might be. The hope that blazed in his eyes was beautiful to see. Really, really. But James, I am also scared. A month ago I was being sold on an auction block. I do not want you to feel like you have to love me out of pity or obligation, or because you could not save your sister. I need to know this is real. It is real. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, slightly rough, and it made her feel grounded and alive. "Natalie, I swear to you, this is not about Sarah or obligation or anything but you. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and you make me want to be better, do better, build something that matters. I want to court you properly if you will let me. I want to see if this feeling between us can grow into something lasting." "I want that too," she whispered. James lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right." "It is all right," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was soft, almost tentative, a question more than a demand. Natalie had been kissed once before, by a boy at a church social when she was 16, but this was nothing like that clumsy encounter. This was warmth and gentleness, and a barely restrained passion that made her knees weak. She kissed him back, letting herself feel everything she had been holding back, and heard him make a low sound of pleasure. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. James rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I wish you had done it sooner," she said, and he laughed, the sound full of joy. They sat back down on the porch, but this time James pulled his chair close to hers and they held hands as they watched the last of the sunset fade into night. It felt momentous, like something fundamental had shifted in the world, and Natalie supposed it had. A few hours ago she had been a guest in this house, a charity case being helped by a kind man. Now she was being courted by that man, and the future suddenly looked completely different. "We should take things slowly," James said after a while. "I do not want to rush you into anything. You have been through a lot and you need time to be sure of what you want." "I am already sure," Natalie said, "but I understand. We can take our time. I want to do this right. Court you properly. Let the town see that you are a respectable woman being treated with respect. I want there to be no question about your reputation or my intentions." "Your intentions being," he looked at her, and there was something fierce and tender in his expression. "To marry you if you will have me. Not now, not rushed, but someday. To build a life with you, a family. To give you all the things that were taken from you and more. To love you for the rest of my life." Tears stung Natalie's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I would like that." "Someday." "Someday," he agreed and kissed her again. The next weeks were a kind of golden time that Natalie knew she would remember all her life. James courted her with old-fashioned propriety, always mindful of her reputation. He took her on picnics by the creek. He taught her to ride well enough that they could go out together, racing across the open range and laughing like children. He brought her wildflowers and read poetry to her in the evenings and made her feel cherished in 1,000 small ways. Mrs. Chen watched their courtship with approval, occasionally chaperoning their outings but mostly giving them space to grow into their feelings. Manuel and Diego treated Natalie with even more respect, clearly seeing which way the wind was blowing and approving of their boss's choice. James took Natalie into town for church on Sundays and introduced her to people as a guest at his ranch. There was gossip, of course, but James faced it down with calm dignity. When someone made a snide comment about Natalie's past, about the auction, James simply said, "Miss Zimmerman is a family friend who fell on hard times. I am helping her get back on her feet as any decent person would. If you have a problem with that, you have a problem with me." Most people backed down after that. James Taylor was respected in San Antonio, known as a fair dealer and a hard worker. His opinion carried weight. One Sunday after church, James drove them to a small restaurant for lunch, a rare treat. As they sat across from each other eating roast chicken and potatoes, Natalie felt a wave of contentment so strong it almost frightened her. "What is it?" James asked, noticing her expression. "I am just happy. It scares me sometimes how happy I am, like it might be taken away." "I am not going anywhere," James said firmly, "and I will not let anything happen to you. You are safe, Natalie. You can trust this." "I am learning to." She reached across the table and took his hand. "It is just hard sometimes. 2 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it is just beginning." "That is because it is." He squeezed her hand. "Everything before was just preparation for this. For us." As summer deepened into fall, their relationship deepened too. The work of the ranch changed with the season's roundup, branding, preparing for winter. Natalie learned to help with all of it, working alongside James and the hands. She discovered she was good at keeping the books, at managing supplies, at handling the business side of ranching. James came to rely on her input, valuing her opinions and ideas. One evening in late September, James asked her to walk with him after dinner. They strolled to the spot by the creek he had shown her that first day, where the water pooled clear and the flowers still bloomed. The air was cooler now, touched with the first hint of autumn. "I brought you here for a reason," James said, and there was nervousness in his voice that she had never heard before. "What reason?" He took both her hands in his, looking down at them for a moment before meeting her eyes. "Natalie, I know we said we would take things slow. It has been almost 3 months since you came here, and in some ways that is not very long. But in other ways, it feels like I have known you my whole life. Every day I am more certain that you are the person I want to spend the rest of my life with." Natalie's heart started to race. She knew what was coming and she was ready for it, wanted it with everything in her. "I love you," James continued. "I love your strength and your kindness and the way you throw yourself into everything you do. I love how you laugh at my bad jokes and how you are not afraid of hard work. I love the life we are building together, and I want to keep building it. Not as employer and employee, not as friends, but as husband and wife." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. "Natalie Zimmerman, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her with joy. "Yes, James, I will marry you." His whoop of happiness echoed across the water as he slipped the ring on her finger, then swept her into his arms and spun her around. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, and when he kissed her, it tasted like salt and joy and promise. "I want to marry you soon," James said when they finally broke apart. "I do not want a long engagement. Is that all right?" "It is more than all right. I do not want to wait either." "We will do it right, though. Church wedding, a real dress, everyone we know invited. I want the whole town to see me marry you, to know that you are my wife and I am proud of it. I do not need anything fancy, I know, but I want to give it to you anyway." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I want to give you everything, Natalie, everything you deserve and more." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told Mrs. Chen the news, she cried and hugged them both and immediately started planning the wedding. Manuel and Diego offered hearty congratulations, clearly delighted for their boss. That night, lying in her bed, Natalie looked at the ring on her finger and marveled at how completely her life had changed. 4 months ago she had stood on an auction block, sure that her life as she knew it was over. Now she was engaged to a wonderful man, living in a place she loved, with a future that looked brighter than anything she had ever imagined. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. They set the wedding date for late October, giving them time to prepare but not waiting too long. Natalie worked with Mrs. Chen to make her wedding dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. James arranged for the church in town, sent word to neighbors and friends, planned a reception at the ranch after the ceremony. Natalie had no family to invite, a fact that made her sad until James reminded her that she was gaining a family. Mrs. Chen would stand with her, and Manuel's wife, Rosa, offered to help with the reception. The Martinez family, the neighbors James had pointed out on that first ride, were delighted by the news and offered their daughter Maria as a bridesmaid. As the wedding day approached, Natalie found herself getting nervous. Not about marrying James, she was completely sure about that. But about the wedding itself, about standing up in front of the whole town and declaring her love. About the wedding night that would follow, about becoming a wife in truth. The night before the wedding, Mrs. Chen sat with her in her room, helping her finish the last details of her dress. "You are nervous," the older woman observed, a little. "Is that silly?" "Not at all. It is a big step you are taking tomorrow." Mrs. Chen threaded her needle carefully. "But you love him and he loves you. Everything else will work itself out. What if I am not good at being a wife? What if I disappoint him? Natalie, look at me." Mrs. Chen waited until she did. "James does not expect you to be perfect. He just expects you to be yourself. That is who he fell in love with. Just keep being that person and you will do fine." "What about after the wedding?" Natalie felt her face heat. "The wedding night. I do not really know what to expect." Mrs. Chen's expression softened with understanding. "James is a good man, a gentle man. He will be patient with you. Just remember that marriage is a partnership in all things, including that. You talk to each other, you figure things out together. It might be awkward at first, but it will get better." Natalie nodded, grateful for the advice even if she was still nervous. "Now," Mrs. Chen said briskly, "go get some sleep. Tomorrow is your wedding day and you want to look rested and beautiful." Natalie did not sleep much that night, too excited and nervous, but when dawn came she felt ready. She bathed and Mrs. Chen helped her dress, pinning her hair up and tucking wildflowers into it. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman looking back. She looked happy. She looked loved. The church was full when they arrived, the whole town seeming to have turned out for the wedding. Natalie walked down the aisle on Manuel's arm, since she had no father to give her away, and her eyes were only for James waiting at the altar. He looked handsome in his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed, his blue eyes bright with emotion. When she reached him and took his hand, he whispered, "You look beautiful." "So do you," she whispered back, and he grinned. The ceremony was traditional and simple. They spoke their vows clearly, meaning every word. James's voice was steady and sure when he promised to love and cherish her. Natalie's hands trembled only slightly when she promised to honor and keep him. The reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and when James kissed her, the church erupted in applause. The reception at the ranch was joyful and boisterous. Mrs. Chen and Rosa had outdone themselves with food. There was music and dancing, and Natalie found herself passed from partner to partner as seemingly every man there wanted to dance with the bride. But James kept cutting in, pulling her back into his arms, and she was always happy to go. "Having fun, Mrs. Taylor?" he asked as they swayed together. "Mrs. Taylor," she repeated, testing out her new name. "I like how that sounds." "I love how it sounds." He pulled her closer, not quite proper for a public dance, but not quite scandalous either. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I knew was possible." As evening fell, the guests began to leave, offering congratulations and good wishes. Mrs. Chen hugged them both and then announced she would be staying at the Martinez ranch for a few days, giving them privacy. Manuel and Diego likewise made themselves scarce. Suddenly Natalie and James were alone in their house, husband and wife, and the nerves came rushing back. "Would you like some tea?" James asked, clearly nervous himself. "That would be nice." They sat in the kitchen drinking tea, both too keyed up to really taste it. Finally, James set down his cup and reached for her hand. "Natalie, I want you to know that there is no pressure tonight. We have our whole lives together. If you need time to adjust, to feel comfortable, we can wait." She loved him so much in that moment for his consideration. But she did not want to wait. She wanted to be his wife in every way, to start their life together fully. "I do not want to wait," she said softly. "I am nervous, but I am ready. I trust you, James." The look he gave her was full of love and desire and tenderness all at once. "Then come with me, wife." He led her upstairs to his room, which would now be their room. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had placed fresh flowers on the dresser and turned down the bed. A lamp burned low, casting warm light. James closed the door behind them and then just held her for a long moment, his arms around her, his cheek against her hair. "I love you so much," he murmured. "I will try to make this good for you. I love you too." What followed was awkward at times, as Mrs. Chen had warned, but it was also sweet and tender and beautiful. James was patient and gentle, guiding her through the newness of physical intimacy. And when it was over and they lay tangled together in the sheets, Natalie felt changed in some fundamental way. She was a wife now, fully and completely. She was loved and she was home. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together as husband and wife, to navigate the intimacy of sharing a bed and a life. But they were good months, full of laughter and love and the deep satisfaction of building something together. As winter set in, they settled into the routines of ranch life. James taught Natalie more about managing the business side of the operation, and she proved to have a sharp head for figures and planning. Together, they made decisions about which cattle to sell, which to keep for breeding, how to improve their operation. In January, Natalie realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure before telling James, wanting to be certain before she got his hopes up. When she finally told him over breakfast one morning, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, swept her into his arms, and spun her around before remembering to set her down gently. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Natalie, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" "Happy, I am thrilled, overjoyed. This is everything I ever wanted." He cupped her face in his hands. "A child, our child. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," she said, and meant it. She had seen how James treated the children of neighbors with patience and kindness and genuine interest. He would be the kind of father every child deserved. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. James was attentive almost to a fault, constantly worrying about her health, insisting she rest more and work less. Mrs. Chen, who had returned after their honeymoon period, was equally protective, making sure Natalie ate well and did not overdo it. As her belly swelled with the growing baby, Natalie found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she now had. This time last year, she had been watching her father destroy himself with gambling, terrified of what would happen when he died. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, carrying his child, living in a home that was truly hers. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Natalie voiced this thought to James. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life," she said, her hand on her rounded belly where the baby was kicking. "A year ago I was being sold on an auction block. Now I am sitting here with my husband, about to become a mother, and I am so happy it scares me." James pulled her close, careful of her belly. "You do not have to be scared anymore. This is real and it is lasting, and nothing is going to take it away. We have built this together and we are going to keep building it. Our family, our ranch, our life. It is all ours. I know. But sometimes I think about what would have happened if you had not been there that day, If someone else had bought my contract, I would not be here. I would not have this life. But I was there, and you are here, and this is where you are supposed to be." He kissed her temple. "Everything that happened before led us to each other. I cannot be sorry for that, even for the hard parts." Their son was born in early September, during a golden afternoon when the heat of summer was just starting to break. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when James, pacing downstairs while Mrs. Chen and the midwife attended Natalie, thought he might go mad with worry. But finally, the cry of a baby filled the house and Mrs. Chen came down to get him. "You have a son," she said, beaming. "A healthy, strong boy, and Natalie is fine, just tired." James took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom. Natalie was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but glowing with joy, holding a bundle of blankets. When he approached, she pulled back the blanket to show him a tiny red face, scrunched up and beautiful. "Meet your son," she said softly. James felt tears spill down his cheeks as he looked at the tiny person they had created. "He is perfect, he is. We should name him." They had discussed names but never quite decided. "What about Joseph?" James suggested. "After my father, Joseph Martin Taylor." "Joseph," Natalie tested the name. "I like it. Joseph Taylor. Welcome to the world, little one." James sat on the edge of the bed and put his arms around his wife and son, feeling more complete than he ever had in his life. This was everything. This moment, this family, this love. Everything he had worked for, everything he had hoped for, right here in his arms. Joseph turned out to be a good baby, healthy and strong. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and both parents were absolutely besotted with him. James was a devoted father, coming in from the range to check on his son, holding him in the evenings, singing to him the same trail songs he sang to the cattle. Natalie recovered her strength and settled into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She was a natural mother, patient and loving, and watching her with their son made James fall even more deeply in love with her. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. They added more cattle, bought some neighboring land, built the new house that James had dreamed of on that rise overlooking the creek. It was a beautiful home with plenty of room for a growing family. When Joseph was 2, Natalie gave birth to a daughter, Emma Rose. 3 years after that came another son, Samuel James. Their family was complete, the house filled with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of children. James and Natalie grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered hard times, droughts that tested the ranch, illness that scared them, the normal struggles of raising children and running a business. But they weathered them together, their partnership and love seeing them through. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch of their beautiful home and remember that day in San Antonio when everything had changed. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not been at that auction?" James asked once. Natalie, now 35 and more beautiful to him than ever, shook her head. "No, because this is my life. This is where I was always meant to end up, with you, with our children, with this ranch. Everything before was just the journey to get here." I think about it sometimes. I think about how close I came to not going to town that day. I almost decided to skip it, handle business another time. But something made me go. Call it fate, call it divine providence, call it luck, but I am grateful for it every day. So am I. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved me, James, not just from that auction, but from believing my life was over. You gave me choices, you gave me freedom, and then you gave me love. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much. Before you, I was just existing, working myself to death to avoid dealing with grief and loneliness. You made me live again. You made me happy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the Texas sky, listening to the sounds of the ranch they had built together settling for the night. Inside the house, Joseph, now 15 and already taller than his father, was probably reading by lamplight when he should be sleeping. Emma, 12 and full of fire, was likely sneaking downstairs for one more cookie. Samuel, 9 and his mother's shadow, was certainly actually asleep, worn out from a day of following his father around the ranch. This was their life. This was their family. This was the future that had seemed impossible on that hot July day 20 years ago when a woman stood on an auction block, and a man made the choice to offer freedom instead of bondage. As the years continued to pass, James and Natalie watched their children grow into fine young adults. Joseph proved to be a natural rancher like his father, taking on more and more responsibility until he was essentially running the operation alongside James. Emma shocked everyone by declaring she wanted to be a teacher and studying hard to make it happen. Samuel found his calling in breeding horses, developing an eye for bloodlines and temperament that made the Taylor Ranch known for quality stock. When Joseph was 23, he married Maria Martinez, the neighbor girl who had been Natalie's bridesmaid all those years ago. The wedding was large and joyful, and watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved made Natalie remember her own wedding with deep fondness. "We are getting old," she said to James that night as they prepared for bed. "Speak for yourself," James protested, but he was grinning. At 52, he was graying at the temples and had lines around his eyes, but he was still strong, still vital, still the man she had fallen in love with. "Our son is married. We will be grandparents soon, probably. That makes us old. It makes us blessed." James pulled her into his arms. "I would not change a single thing about our life together, Natalie. Not one moment. Not even the hard parts, not even those. They made us who we are. They taught us what matters." He kissed her, still able to make her heart race after all these years. "I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you on that auction block, looking scared but defiant, and I will love you until my last breath. I love you too, always." True to Natalie's prediction, they became grandparents within the year. Joseph and Maria had a son they named James, after his grandfather, and the whole family celebrated the new addition with joy. Emma finished her schooling and got a position teaching at the San Antonio school, making the family proud. Samuel, at 18, took over the horse breeding operation completely, proving himself more than capable. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of James and Joseph working together. James was able to step back a bit, letting his son take the lead while he enjoyed being a grandfather and spending more time with Natalie. They took to taking morning rides together, just the two of them, out to that spot by the creek that had always been special to them. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just enjoyed the silence and the beauty of the land they loved. But it was their time, sacred and precious. One morning when Natalie was 55 and James was almost 60, they sat by the creek and Natalie said, "We should write it all down, our story. So the grandchildren will know. Know what? Where we came from, what we overcame, how love can triumph over the worst circumstances." Natalie picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed. "Joseph knows the basics, but the younger grandchildren do not really understand. I want them to know that their grandmother was once sold on an auction block, and their grandfather was the man who gave her freedom. I want them to know that good men exist, that choices matter, that love is always worth fighting for." James considered this. "All right, we will write it down. Together, our story in our own words." So they did. On long evenings they would sit together and write, taking turns with the pen, reminding each other of details, laughing over memories, and sometimes crying over the harder parts. It took them months, but finally they had it. The full story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they built a life together. They bound it into a book and gave copies to each of their children. "This is your inheritance," James told them. "Not just the ranch, not just the money, but this. The story of where you came from, the proof that love and decency and courage matter." Emma cried when she read it. Joseph clasped his father's hand hard and said, "I am proud to be your son." Samuel, quieter than his siblings, simply hugged them both and said, "Thank you for showing me what love should look like." More years passed, bringing more grandchildren, more joy, more life. James and Natalie grew older gracefully, their hair silver now, their steps slower, but their love for each other undimmed. They remained partners in every sense, working together, laughing together, facing whatever challenges came together. When James was 72, he had a health scare that frightened them all. He recovered, but it was a reminder that their time was not infinite. After that, they made a point of saying what mattered, of not taking any moment for granted. "I am glad I have lived this long," James said one evening as they sat on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by family. "Because it means more years with you, more time to watch our family grow, more sunsets from this porch. Every day is a gift." Natalie, 70 herself now and still beautiful in his eyes, squeezed his hand. "We have been very blessed. Not everyone gets a love story like ours." "No," James agreed, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, listening to the sounds of their children talking and laughing inside. "Not everyone does, but we did. Against all odds, we found each other, we chose each other, and we built this beautiful life together. I would not change a single thing." "Neither would I," Natalie said, leaning her head on his shoulder just as she had done 1,000 times before. "Neither would I." They sat there as the sun set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Around them was everything they had built together: the ranch, the family, the legacy of love and choices and courage. Inside was the warmth of home and the laughter of people who loved each other. It had started with an auction block and a choice to offer freedom instead of bondage. It had grown into a love story that spanned decades, that created a family, that proved that even in the hardest circumstances, goodness and love could triumph. James Taylor had outbid everyone and said, "Now you are free to choose." And Natalie Zimmerman had chosen him, chosen love, chosen to build a life worth living. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would echo through generations. And on that porch, in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor, they held hands and smiled, knowing that their story had turned out exactly right. Two people who had found each other when they needed each other most, who had chosen love over fear, partnership over loneliness, hope over despair. It was a good story. It was a good life. And sitting there together, growing old but not old enough to forget the passion and joy of their journey, James and Natalie Taylor knew they were among the fortunate few who got there happily ever after. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through their children and their children's children. The story would be told and retold, a reminder that one choice, one moment of compassion and courage could change everything. That love was worth fighting for, worth building on, worth everything it cost and more. As the stars came out over Texas and the night sounds of the ranch filled the air, James leaned over and kissed his wife's cheek. "Still choosing me?" he asked, as he had asked her countless times over the years. "Always choosing you," she replied, as she always did, and that in the end was what mattered most. Not where they had started, but where they had ended up. Not what had been done to them, but what they had chosen to build together. Not the fear and darkness of that auction block, but the love and light they had created in all the years since. Their story was complete. Their family was thriving. Their love had lasted a lifetime and would continue in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. And as they rose to go inside to their warm home and their comfortable bed, to sleep side by side as they had done for more than 50 years, James and Natalie Taylor knew that theirs had been a life well lived, a love well earned, a story worth telling. From auction block to happily ever after, from strangers to soulmates, from desperate circumstances to abundant blessing, they had traveled the journey together. And they would continue traveling it, hand in hand, heart to heart, until the very end. It was a good way to live. It was a good way to love. And it was the perfect ending to a story that had started with a simple choice to offer freedom and had blossomed into a love that would last forever.